So we'll go right into it. I just read the book. I think it's beautifully written. It's more, in a way, it's a meditation on the state of Israel and its history. A series of vignettes of portraits of the people who built the country and who led it. And really a beautiful evocation of the struggles of that state and of its people. And I wanted to start off by asking Ari a couple of questions. When you read the book, you really get a palpable sense of two things. The fear that grips most Israelis about their state and about their condition. And Ari, I think, paints a picture of the early Zionists at the very end of the 19th century, in the first 4 decades of the 20th century, as victims. And he writes in the very first page of the book about an image he had from the time he was a young boy, that a dark ocean would rise and drown us all. And if you think about the struggles that the Zionists faced from 1897, here's some dates. 1919, 1942, we were just talking in my office. The summer of 1942, the Zionist leadership felt there was a high probability that Rommel would punch through the British defense line west of Alexandria. The British would withdraw from the Middle East to India, to the subcontinent, and the Zionists would be left fighting the German army, the Nazi army in the Middle East, as well as have to cope with the Arab Revolt, which had just occurred before the Nazi invasion of North Africa. And you said, Ari, in the book, you felt sometimes that our daily life might freeze like Pompeii. And that was the image you had as a young boy. So if you could tell us about your book, why you wrote it, but Israel is a victim.
We always say it's a pleasure and an honor, but to be here and to see all of you here, this is a real pleasure and a real honor. So thank you so much for being here. I traveled a long way, and I faced some challenging days, but to see you all here is already deeply rewarding. So I'm deeply grateful for each and every one of you. I think you touched about 2 or 3 points. If I may, I will not start with the founding Zionists, which we'll get to in a minute. But I'll start with this notion of fear. And I will try to address it personally. I mean, if there is a concept, this book is about a story, a narrative. It's not about a theory, it's not about arguments. As I like to say, I hope there are some important insights here, but I didn't write this in order, this is as far as you can get from a polemic book. The whole idea was not to write a polemic book, but to tell a story that I think was lost. My feeling, and the reason I wrote the book, is that I felt that to begin with Zionism, what made Israel were at the beginning, the very beginning, we had a narrative, a very strong narrative. Before we had a state, before we had any sort of entity. And the irony is that the stronger the entity, the physical entity became, physically, economically, militarily, the narrative was lost. The narrative disintegrated. And there were several reasons to that in my mind. One of them, major one, is the 1967 war, occupation, the debate over occupation, which split the narrative and changed our positioning. But there were some other factors like Israeli cynicism, which is one of the malaises of my country, and something that I wish we learned from your country to be a bit less cynical. And I think that in a sense, because we were so intensive into the story, into the narrative in the first 50, 60 years, at a certain point we got fed up with this and we lost it. But I think that if there is something I try to do here is to put all the Israel debates, all the Israel love and all the Israel hate, whatever you want, put it in perspective. Look at the big picture. And in my mind, the basic Israeli condition today is defined by these 2 pillars, occupation and intimidation. The fact that on the one hand we are the only democracy and one of the few countries we want to relate to that is actually occupying another people, which is unbearable. But on the other hand, we are definitely the only OECD country, but probably one of the few nations in the world that is really, truly, inherently, existentially threatened. So my plea, and this is a place, a building that has some impact on thinking, I plea any decent thinking person, when coming to address the conflict and coming to talk about Israel, to relate to these two issues. I don't think we should all agree, but I think that once we'll all wrestle with the complexity, the discussion will be more rational, more civilized, and more decent. And therefore I think that there is this tendency of people on the left to overlook occupation, and the tendency of people on the right to overlook intimidation. I hope we can end that and let each and every one wrestle with this complexity. Now coming to your the personal. Let me share with you, if I may, the fear that I described at the beginning of the book. And I'll be cautious. I'm not sure all Israelis feel that. This is my own book. I'm the only one responsible for it. My hunch, my feeling, is that most Israelis have it in their mind, but they tend to suppress it. So I would dare say that I'm expressing in a very open and direct way something that is on many, not all, many Israeli minds, but is usually not referred to, not discussed, not articulated. So my first fear is 10 days or so before the 6-day war. I'm less than 9 years old, 8.5 years old. And I remember vividly standing, my father, who was a chemist in the Weizmann Institute, shaving in the bathroom. And I remember asking him, what will happen to us? And, you know, I'm an anti-occupation guy. I think the formula for two-state solution has to refer to the 1967 war. But let us remember, let us not forget that when I was 8.5 years old, there wasn't one settlement. There wasn't one checkpoint. There was no occupation. But our neighbors wanted to destroy us, probably to kill us. And when that happened, only 22 years after Auschwitz, the one ally we had in the world, France, betrayed us. They let us face our own destiny. And the great United States, that was not yet our strategic ally, could not do anything to save us. When Abba Eban came to Washington, and Lyndon Baines Johnson was a very friendly president, but he could not do anything about it. So a people that experienced the Holocaust, 22 years later, experienced what they thought might be extinction, and there was no international community out there, there was no America out there, and the one ally that we had betrayed us. So whenever I hear Europeans preaching us, I ask to put it in perspective. Yes, occupation is wrong, and we should deal with it. But when you ask Israel to go back to the 67 lines, which is something basically I think we should do, realize what the risks are, and remember the formative trauma we had. Remember this. This is not some Israeli neurosis. This is legitimate fears, and our history. Remember, our history is legitimate as well. So going back to your question, yes, from that moment, I remember some fear before that. in the years before that. But that was the most frightening of all. And I think that a lot of the mistakes Israel made after 67, and the fact that we did get into this trap of occupation and settlement, has a lot to do with the quick transfer from existential fear in the end of May 67 to this miraculous victory. And as a result, in my mind, we went out of balance mentally. Our psyche, we were so responsible before, under the leadership of mainly Ben-Gurion and then Eshkol. We were, on the one hand, committed to the goal, but always restrained. We knew we need power, but we knew we needed the moral high ground. We were very, very impressive. Our leadership was impressive. And in 67, we lost it. And in my mind, one of the reasons we lost it is this phenomenal change from deep existential fear to this wild victory, which threw out of balance.
Thank you. And Ari, I am struck in your book by this intersection between victimhood and also occupation. And I was first struck by this presence of fear in your book. But you also write about occupation. For as long as I can remember, I remember occupation. And there's a remarkable line that Israel's the only nation in the West that is occupying another people. On the other hand, Israel is the only nation in the West that is existentially threatened. I wonder if you could talk about that juxtaposition.
So first I'll begin with the actually programmatic part. I mean, we tend to say that occupation is the main failure of Israel, and I largely agree. But I think that a large part of that failure, the reason we were not able to deal with this, is that there wasn't enough recognition of intimidation. I'm actually somewhat optimistic about the majority of Israelis. I don't think they are as extreme right-wingers as sometimes it is perceived. But because they have these justified fears, traumas of the past, like the one I described from 67, because they have the justified traumas of what happened in recent history, the Israeli center, the Israeli moderate majority went for peace in 1993. Yasser Arafat arrives in Gaza. Now, to my knowledge, as far as, correct me if I'm wrong, to this day, this country has some difficulties with Fidel Castro's regime. Fidel is Jeff's best friend, one of his best friends. Israel broke the taboo that the United States found it so difficult to break. Yasser Arafat for us was much more demonic, much more dangerous, much more frightening than Fidel Castro is to the United States. Yet we broke the taboo and we brought Yasser Arafat to Gaza. What happens? 5 months later, a first bus explodes in Tel Aviv. Then in 2000, we go to Camp David under the leadership of President Clinton with a courageous peace initiative. What happens? 2 months later, a terrible offensive of terror with creating a surreal reality throughout Israel with suicide bombing. Then we try to pull out of Gaza. What happens? Southern Israel is exposed to the threat of rockets. So 3 times in recent history, plus the 67 trauma, what does all this lead? That people are terrified and they are frozen. Give them a peace concept that is realistic. Give them an Israeli left that addresses the brutality of the region and the depth of the conflict. Give them an international community that addresses all of this and addresses their legitimate fears, and I assure you, you will see surprising results. You will see move in the right direction. I think we are stuck with occupation because intimidation was not properly dealt with.
Thank you. Jeff, let me bring you in here, but before I do, I was remiss not just recognizing 2 very important people. It's always perilous to do this, but Professor Brian Mandel is the faculty advisor for our Wexner program. That's our fellowship program, very successful for Israeli students. I want to recognize Brian and his leadership, and Professor Bob Manukin of Harvard Law School, who helps to run our program on negotiation. So I want to recognize both of them. Thanks to all the faculty members who are here.
Thank you, Nick, Ari, for doing this. from Raul Castro that I'd like to read.
4 hours long.
Yeah, it's 4 hours. Yeah, we'll end at 9. It's actually interesting because I've seen Ari's been on a book tour now for, it seems like, 5 years, right? But it's a couple of months. He's, to quote Bon Jovi, he's seen a million faces, ambivalent faces, and he's rocked most of them. But it's interesting because I haven't actually asked you about your feelings and understandings about, particularly the American Jewish community and the historical moment in which we find ourselves. We share an obsession about the state of relations between the world's two remaining large Jewish communities, the Jewish community of Israel and the Jewish community of the United States. And one of the things, I too, in the existential dread sweepstakes, I try to compete with Ari, and most of the time I keep up. One of the feelings of dread that I have is something that I've noticed over the past years, which is a gradual drifting apart of these two main Jewish communities. They haven't drifted very far apart. Some of the discussion of this is overdone, overwrought, but it is fair to say that the American Jewish community in the main is becoming more universalistic in its outlook, detribalized, more assimilated, and therefore a little bit more detached from Israel and the narrative, the Zionist narrative than it used to be. Israel, on the other hand, and this is where I would challenge Ari a little bit, from the outside, it seems that's becoming more religious, more fundamentally religious, more tribalized, more, in a way, ghettoized. Again, I don't want to overdraw this, but you mentioned Abba Eban, who was once Israel's foreign minister. Today you have a foreign minister in Avigdor Lieberman, who is nothing like the foreign ministers of the past.
Much more gentle.
Yeah, right. Extremely well read. And so I want your diagnosis, if you could, on two fronts. One is, from what you've seen so far, do you worry about a breakup coming between large portions of the American Jewish community and Israel? And the second point, and this is an extremely relevant question, do you see anything in the internal Israeli political dynamic that suggests that, given certain conditions, that the traditional labor ideas about a two-state solution, that the progressive Israel that most Americans can relate to, that's exemplified by the culture you write about so well, Tel Aviv, do you see that returning in force, or are we on some sort of inexorable slide toward a more Middle Easternized Israel, meaning more religious, more tribal, maybe more dysfunctional as well?
The Middle East dysfunctional?
The Middle East is dysfunctional, yes. I'm going to go out on a limb.
So first of all, Jeff is not only the greatest journalist, the greatest mensch one can think of. And
that's in lieu of payment, I get that.
So it's, this book had really received so much, not like love after being published, but there was so much labor of love surrounding it, and it had many mothers, but it had 2 or 3 godfathers, and Jeffrey is definitely one of the most important of them. So as I said before in the room, my debt to Jeff matches your national debt. So
and it'll be paid off just as soon.
So it's not surprising that I love your question, Jeff, because look, I still hope we'll talk about the book and contents of it, but one of the reasons I'm back in this country, I did my proper book tour, now I'm back, and I plan to be quite a lot here in the coming months, is that I feel a real sense of commitment on this issue that you just mentioned. And in the book, I write about it, but only briefly. So let me a bit elaborates. I'll take one paragraph at the end of the book and elaborate. And I'll try to connect some of the dots of what we discussed. In my mind, the book not only brings, on my claim, the sense of victim, by the way, which should not be exaggerated and should not be abused. I mean, we have that danger as well. But I try to bring back the sense of wonder. The sense of wonder. And in my mind, when you look, you do not have to be Jewish or Philo-Semite in order to observe this drama of the Jews in the 20th century and be amazed. We had a very, very tragic history for 2 millennia. But the 20th century was the most dramatic in our dramatic history. Why? Because on the first half of the 20th century, we lost a third of our people. Something that even we never experienced, and no other nation experienced. Every third Jew. Think of this whole. Every third Jew. So we were down and out. We were in the worst situation by the mid of the 20th century as anyone can imagine. But then, in a magical twist, the second half of the 20th century became our best ever. Our best ever. Why? Because in Israel, we've established Jewish sovereignty for the first time in 2,000 years in a miraculous process. A painful, a tragic, a flawed, but miraculous process. Israel is a man-made miracle. It is the act of a people that has saved itself at the very last moment. With insight, with imagination, with determination. I know that Zionism became a dirty word. I'm a proud Zionist. Zionist revolution is the most amazing revolution one can imagine. But it not only gives political freedom, political rights to people like other revolutions. Not only gave social rights. It literally saved a people that was about to perish. And this has to remember and be respected, even when you go into all the darker sides and you give Israel all the criticism you should give. But at the same time, there was another miracle. And that's the miracle of the creation of a perfect diaspora in this country. And just as I admire the founders of Zionism and the many, many people who did that amazing endeavor that is Israel today, I admire American Jewry. I know this is not something very popular to say, but I'll say it. I'll take the fire. I think what was created in this country should be, by the American Jewish community, should be an example for any minority in the world and any minority in this country. Jews should not be ashamed about what they achieved here. They should be proud. What was created here is really a unique voluntary system, a society, not only the individual success of individual Jews, which is much talked about. I think that the way this community functions, again with all the problems and divisions and pettiness and everything, when you take a step back, just as I did with Israel, I think that you see that this is a wonder. And take if there are any Jews here in the room by any chance, let any Jew think of his grandparents or great-grandparents. Where were they? What did they experience? What were their lives like? And what do we have today? So these are the two greatest achievements of the Jewish people in the 20th century. But both are challenged. So Israel is challenged, and we'll probably talk about it with Iran, with the occupation, with its legitimacy problems, with many other issues. The American Jewish community is challenged very much because what Jeff just described. because young American Jews are progressive with by and large, with universal values, and more of them perceive Israel as a tribal entity, and they perceive the organized Jewish community as a tribal matter. And this alienation of more and more young American Jews endangers the two miracles. Because if we do not win the hearts and love and support of young American Jews, there will not be an Israel and there will not be a future for the American Jewish community. So had I been Israel's prime minister, I would say, yes, I face Iran and I have to deal with this. I have faced occupation and I have to deal with this. I have legitimacy problems, I have to deal with this. But one of my main concerns, if not the main, will be these campuses. Harvard and Yale and Columbia and UCLA and the other 300, 400 campuses. The main task of Israel is to make itself once again attractive, and I'll dare say to make itself sexy for young American Jews. This is critical. We've not been doing this. We've been abusing the love we get from many American Jews. The ultra-Orthodox with their segregation of women, the settlers with their aggression in the hills, many of the policies of our right-wing governments, and it's time that all that stops. We must change our ways, and we must develop a new approach, and we must restart the dialogue between these two communities, because we totally depend on one another.
Well, just to follow up very quickly, you say you must do that. Do you see any sign that that is going to happen?
They'll have to. Look, I'll say something about, there was something that you mentioned that I don't totally agree. I agree that Israel has several dark forces working in it. Again, I'm not an ultra-Orthodox basher, but I'm not willing to have the ultra-Orthodox impose their values on our free democratic society. That's one danger. The right, we already discussed, the settlers. I do not, what you were referring to, that Israel is becoming very religious. Israel, and that's, I think, one of the points of the book, Israel is very complex. Israel is going in conflicting directions all the time. So it's true that on the one hand, there are these religious forces. Some of them are perfectly okay, but some of them are troubling. But on the other hand, Israel is such a celebration of liberty and freedom and permissiveness. I think that actually many American Jews find young Israelis too permissive, too wild, too sex-obsessed. I had an argument with some anti-Zionists like 10 years ago, and they said Israel is a theocracy, and they gave some arguments. And I said at that time, we sent a specific singer to the European Eurovision contest, which is the major song contest of Europe. I said, well, Israel is a theocracy perhaps, but it's the only theocracy I know that sends a transsexual to the Eurovision song contest. So this is Israel. There are some elements of our life, with the lack of separation of church and state and so on, that are impossible. But at the end of the day, you walk around, definitely Tel Aviv, but most of the country, you see a lot of freedom, a lot of liberty, a lot of life-loving. I do not think that we are doomed in the sense that the reactionary forces will win over. They might. It depends on us. There is a threat, but I don't think this is lost. And I think we can change the dynamics. And when I talk about the work between the communities, this has to be done. The progressive American Jews have to really recreate their alliance with the progressive Israelis so we can save both. I would say the following to end this. For too long, there was this close alliance between Tea Party America and Tea Party Israel. And I want an alliance between non-Tea Party Israel and non-Tea Party America.
Just one more thing, and I think Nick probably has actually dealt with this issue in government, the Iran question. I think we would just want to hear a couple of minutes on that before you go to the audience. You write from a personal perspective about the Dimona Project, about the 40 years of peace and stability that Israel has bought by maintaining a nuclear monopoly in the Middle East. There are a million ways into this question, which again, another question that we both obsess about. But let me ask you this in a very blunt way. Given what's happening in negotiations right now between between P5+1, U.S. mainly, and Iran, is it fair to say that your prime minister has been outfoxed by the American president? That a prime minister who 2 or 3, 4 years ago we all thought was at the very, very moment of deciding to preemptively or preventatively attack the Iranian nuclear program, but was held back by Obama. Do you think he got outfoxed?
We all, you mean we too?
We three.
It might be, but in my mind, forgive me for politicians like answer, I don't think that's the question. Or that's the
No, I
issue.
think that's the question.
I'll get into that. I'll put it in context. I think the real problem is that we all got outfoxed by the Iranians. If there is one serious player in this game, it's the Iranians. They're sophisticated, they're shrewd, they use every trick in the book in the most sophisticated way, and I don't want to offend anyone, but I think they put all Western players to shame. I think that they've done what their achievement in the last decade is outstanding. They actually have achieved, or they're very close to having achieved, a technological victory. They should not have been anywhere close to where they are now technologically. And they might very well achieve a political victory. As it is now, they have a very good chance. So, to begin with, and this is the issue I have not with you, but with my prime minister, I give Netanyahu credit for 2 matters on the Iran matter. One, that he got it. Many in Israel as well, not only in America. Israel cannot complain, not about America or the West. Israel made so many mistakes. And Israel was so dormant on this issue for so many years. I can tell you that when I wrote my Iran articles 7, 8, 9 years ago, I was like totally ready. People said, "Heaven, what's this alarmism? What's these fears? What's this? What is it with you?" We were dormant in Israel as well. I perhaps will get into the details. There was a major mistake in thinking that this can be solved not in a political manner. This should not have been a Mossad, CIA, NSA issue. This should have been a political warfare launched 10 years ago in a very strong way. Now, many things were done, but too late, too little, too late. So Netanyahu deserves the credit for focus, bringing focus into it in 2009. He also deserves credit that his military option was a political success. It helped move the international community, and I sometimes say that it is Benjamin Netanyahu who elected Rouhani to office, because he created the chain of events that led to Rouhani's election. But having given him that credit, he made he made many mistakes, but 2 that I'll mention right now. One, not to understand that whether you admit it or not, there is linkage between the Palestinian issue and the Iranian issue, even if it's not justified. If Netanyahu would have been consistent with his own saying that this is existential, this is 1938, this is Nazi Germany, very well. He should have stopped settlement activity to change totally the dynamics in the region and to win Israel legitimacy. Had he done that, he would have had the world listening to him. He should have repositioned, reinvented himself. If Madonna can reinvent herself, Netanyahu should have reinvented. This is an important enough matter. And had he been dovish, not whatever his convictions are, the world would have listened to him. The world did not listen us on this issue because of the settlement. The settlements really do not only kill us morally, demographically, and politically. The settlements sabotage the campaign against Iran. So that's Netanyahu's first and big. The second one is that he made it an Israel issue. And to a large extent, he made it a Netanyahu issue. But now, leaving him aside, I ask everyone here, this is not for Israel. This should not be a Netanyahu or an Israel issue. This, in my mind, is a civilization challenge. If Iran will go nuclear, the Middle East will go nuclear. And if the Middle East will go nuclear, our world will change. I do not expect apocalyptic events, but everything will change. So Tel Aviv will be affected first, but Boston will be affected later. So what Netanyahu should have done, and others, is go and create a coalition of all thinkers, I would have gone to authors, to professors, to human rights activists. This should not have been an issue for strategic experts. This should have been something we should have made this campaign on this as popular as any green campaign possible. And perhaps it's too late now, but I hope it's not. Because it shouldn't be an Israel issue. It shouldn't be the issue should not be whether Israel will strike tomorrow. We should all understand that this is our responsibility as free individuals, definitely in the West, but I think this is affected on every human. And we should it's late in the day, but we should deal with this quickly, because the only solution to Iran, in my mind, is very assertive diplomacy, supported by a very strong, determined Western public opinion that is determined to solve one, because at the end of the day, Iran is really nothing compared to the West. If the West has willpower and wisdom, it can stop it.
Sorry. Ari, thank you. I want to go to student questions from our guests. Before, just two slight digressions, very, very briefly. I don't want to belabor the point on Iran, except to say this. You're absolutely right that the Iranians are tough-minded and they're sophisticated. We've seen that from them. But the story's not over. We'll know a lot more in April, May, June than we know now. And I suspect that Barack Obama is tougher than most people on this issue. It's the issue that's animated his political life. If you think about his brief time in the Senate, it was non-proliferation and nuclear weapons. Where he's been toughest as president and received a lot of criticism from the American left is on this issue and also on the issue of Al-Qaeda and terrorism. So I think the jury's out. I'm not sure the Iranians are 10 feet tall, but they're pretty good. But I think we're pretty good too.
I totally agree. My request is really, I think, and this is not only for the president, I think that most of the Western leaders in recent years really got it. The problem was they did not have a political context to work on this. And in many ways, the main problem was that all the energy, all the oxygen in the room, and all the energy in the political body was invested and wasted in Iraq. And Iraq, rather than take America when it was with all its power, all its energy, all its willpower, and deal with the real issue, with the real problem, which was Iran, got wasted in Iraq and Afghanistan. And by the time we all have to deal with Iran, it became much more difficult. But I totally agree. I have believed, first of all, I think this will define the president. I'm an Israeli, I'm an only visitor in this country. I will not make any judgments about an American president. I think this will define his legacy, and I share your belief that he has it in him to deal with it, will deal with it. But let's acknowledge the fact that right now he has to deal with it from a very disturbing point. The opening line is disturbing.
Okay, to be continued. Let's not go down the road or the rock either. That's another story. And we'll never know. Very quickly before we go to student questions and guest questions. You and I are about the same age. When we're very old and very gray, how is this story going to end? Because you chronicle the story of the Jewish people over the last 115 years. Is there hope that Israelis and the world Jewish community will end up in a better position, existentially, 30 years from now than they are now?
Our middle name is Hope. That's our national anthem. Look, one of the reviews about this book said that I liked said that this book reads like a love story and a thriller. And I think that the thriller is, you wonder what's the end. Right? Is there a happy end? Actually, this is part of the tension. And I can tell you, usually when I write my articles and so on, the most difficult sentence is the first one. When I have the first sentence, I have the op-ed or the article. It all flows from that. In this case, the most difficult sentence was the last one. It took me months to come up with that last sentence, which keeps it open. But I'll tell you why I'm hopeful. There is nothing mystic in it. I'm not a religious person, and there's nothing mystical about it. But when you look at Israel's history, and at the Zionists, the first Zionists, I remember what it is.
Okay. I'm sure you didn't let them know.
I don't. We don't want to spoil it.
All right.
We kill the thriller.
Yeah.
So the when you observe the history of the last 100 years, you see that almost every decade the walls were closing in on us. They were really closing in on us, and not almost every decade something happened, external or internal, or something external that we used cleverly to our advantage, that opened things up again and created a future for us. The last time, for an example, was the late 80s, when I remember the depression in Israel with demography, the inflation, the Lebanon war, and the Intifada. And then two things happened. One, the Russian immigration, which changes totally the nation and changes the demography. It reinvigorates our life in every field, every way, economically, technologically, culturally, music. Suddenly there are youngsters who play classic music, so Jeff, we would not be worried that we're all becoming, losing it. So there are young Jewish violin players once again, another generation. So the Russian immigration, and then high tech. Who could have foreseen that? So the Russian immigration and high tech suddenly, with all our dysfunctional politics, with all the occupation problems, with all the depression, the failure of the attempts to achieve peace, but these two events totally opened the horizon and in many ways made Israel flourish in a remarkable way. So I have a basic hope in the energy of this people. And what I will say about this last chapter that you opened up is that what I described there is, on the one hand, what we discussed, the most endangered nation on the face of the earth in many ways. But on the other hand, within these circles of danger, there is this great success of Zionism. And what is it? We did not manage to create the utopia we set out to create. There is no kibbutz dream. The kibbutz dream was shattered. There will not be a socialist paradise. That's gone. We don't have a just society in a remarkable way. But we did create the most robust, free society one can imagine. And this society is so creative and innovative and sensual and sexy. It so celebrates life in so many ways. We make more babies than any other OECD country. And that's a deep indication. Think about it. Childbirth demographic numbers are really telling about a society. These are decisions that are very deep in each one's life. So the fact that we are child-friendly in such a way, and we are life-loving, this is the great hope I have about our future. I think that we've turned our life on the edge, not to something depressing and pessimistic, and we're not a whining people. There are impossible people, we're not whining people. but we've turned life on the edge to a source of power, of amazing energy. And when I look at this phenomenon, I mean, at the end of the day, I have to say it in a word, Israel is an amazing phenomenon of vitality against all odds. So I believe in this vitality. But the challenge, to combine what you were talking about, is to take that vitality from the economy, from society, from the arts, from the nightlife, from all that, and bring it back to politics. Because with our situation, we cannot allow to have the primitive, provincial, petty politics we have. So if we will channel that energy that the Israeli people have back to politics, back to the way we handle our public affairs, I'm very hopeful.
Sounds like a good prescription for the United States of America. Do you want to read the last sentence, or the last two sentences?
If at all, I'll
Maybe you
read
can
the last.
recite them.
I'll write the last several. I mean, I'll because how long do you think patience will be?
I don't want to hear the last two sentences.
Because okay, so I described myself walking in the Jaffa harbor, to which my great-grandfather came in 1897, and I watched the vitality around. And what I say is the following. We do not trust high words or lofty concepts, and yet we take part daily in a phenomenal historical vision. We participate in an event far greater than ourselves. We are a ragtag cast in an epic motion picture whose plot we do not understand and cannot grasp. The script writer went mad. The director ran away. The producer went bankrupt. But we are still here on this biblical set. The camera is still rolling on. And as the camera pans out and pulls up, it sees us converging on this shore and clinging to this shore and leaving on this shore, come what may.